Hi, Angie here from Crafts at Home. Welcome back to this video series where I'm going to be featuring the art of quilting from Shape Artworks. Hopefully you will have completed the first 8 blocks and have them stored flat and ironed ready for joining in later issues. With this issue you'll be receiving the blossom, daisy and white on white fabrics to create the lovely cactus block. Before you begin, iron all of your fabrics so they're nice and flat, and this will make them easier to work with and improve the overall finish of your quilt. Let's start marking and cutting. Hi, so as you can see I've now done all of the marking on our 3 fabrics. I'll cut out the daisy. I've done the template slightly differently to the cutting layout just so I can save some more fabric. So I've got some extra for future issues if I need it. I'm just going to butt that up against the line and take a nice cut along. Take the corner off so we've got our first piece. If you've gone down the same layout as myself, you might find it slightly easier to cut with scissors. It all depends on how confident you are planning ahead for your long straight cuts and then taking into consideration your smaller cuts afterwards. So I've got a nice amount of spare material to keep there. And there's my template J and my 2 template Fs. I'm going to pop along and do the blossom and the white on white spot, and I'll see you back here soon. So as usual, you place out all the squares how you're going to finish the block. So to start with on this piece, we're going to take away everything apart from your 4 pairs of triangles there. And to start with, all you need to do with these ones is turn them over, right sides together, and pin along this bias edge. There's actually quite a lot of steps into this one, so it's ideal just to take it step by step as directed in the book and the video, so you know where you are at every stage. So you just turn over, match your edges together nicely, being careful not to stretch your fabric because it's a bias edge. Pop a pin at a right angle to the seam that you're going to be sewing. It's always a good idea to do that so you know what edge you're going to be sewing at. With this white on white spot, you might just take a little bit more time just to make sure that you've got the right side facing, so you don't get the wrong side when you open it up. There we go. Right, I'm going to pop and go over to the sewing machine now where we'll be sewing these together and chain stitching. I'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. So I've got my first 4 pieces to sew. I've changed my stitch saver, so I've got a nice new one to start with for this piece. So as usual, butt your first piece up against your needle and start sewing on. Just stop with your needle down before the first pin, take out and carry on. If you wanted to do it by hand sewing, you can follow this link to see how we hand sew all the pieces together. So you take a couple of stitches off the end, pick your second piece up and carry on as we did before. Just take care when you're sewing these that you don't pull them, because you are working on the bias edge, which is quite stretchy. You don't want to misshape your fabric. Because I'm going in corner piece first, there is a slight tendency sometimes with machines to drag the fabric under and catch it in the machine works. So that's why when I'm pulling through, I'm just pulling on this back one here. So the first couple of stitches will take, and then you'll be able to feed it through without any of it actually catching and snagging in the machine. Snip it off at the back, and there's your first 4 pieces sewn for the cactus pot. So I'll see you over at the ironing board in a moment, where I'll be cutting these and ironing them open and showing you how to pin the next part. Welcome back. So I've got all 4 pieces now that are sewn, and I'll just need to iron them open. For these ones you need to iron open to the white. So you pop that on top, set your seam and iron open. So you now need to bring in your large blossom triangle and place each with the points going towards the middle. Once you've got that done, you fold over your pairs and then pin along this middle edge. You haven't got any nesting seams to worry about, so it makes it a little bit easier for pinning. Just make sure that all the seams that you do have are flat and lying in the right direction. So I'm going to do the same for this one. Again, just make sure that all of your edges match. And all the seams are nice and flat. I'm just going to run these through the sewing machine and I'll be back in a moment. So I've just sewn across these seams now, and you want to iron towards the white spot. So just set an iron open. Bring your blossom triangle back in, and you just want to lie them down and make sure again that they're pointing with the yellows towards the middle of there. So your next thing will be to join your rectangles onto your triangle. So take one and fold over, making sure that everything matches nicely. All your seams are lying nice and flat. You've got a double seam there, which is quite bulky, so you need to make sure that everything lies down properly. It's why I often give my fabrics a quick steam as I'm ironing, just to give it that extra bit of heat to make sure that everything will lie flat and nice. So again, making sure that that seam there is lying flat. This one here, I'm not going to pin through the seam as I normally would. I'm going to pin just to either side. The reason being because it is a very flat, very full seam. If you pin it, you're going to distort all of your fabrics. So by pinning either side, it makes sure that it stays in place until you remove that pin at last minute, but it doesn't move your fabrics off. So I'm going to run the sewing machine up along that one now, and I'll see you back here in a moment. So the first thing you want to check before you iron it is open it up to make sure that that triangle is sitting nicely point on the seam line. Just means that you've got your 6mm seam allowance spot on. So we're going to iron towards the big triangle. So you set down and iron open. So now we've got that side, we need to do the other one. So again, exactly the same as you did before. Start again. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that you've got the point of the white triangle spot on your seam line, which is the 6mm seam allowance. So we're going to iron towards the bottom, so you set the seam and nicely iron open. We're going to set that aside for a moment while we take our white square of the white on white spot, make sure it's the right way up, and pop in there. Now you're going to fold this over your rectangle that you haven't yet sewn and pin that together. Making sure the seam's lying in the right direction. So I'm just going to go and sew along this seam here, so we've got a longer rectangle to put on there. I'll be back in a moment. So now I've gone and sewn along that seam, I'm just going to press it open towards the white. And then we match this up here. So you've got an opposite seam here. So when you turn over, you can nest those two together as we have done before. Just make sure that everything's lying nice and flat and tight before pinning it in place. Once you've got that one, you can pin the other seams, making sure again that all of your back seams lie nice and flat. Now we've got a double turnover seam here again, so I'm going to do what I did before and just pin either side of it to make sure it doesn't distort the fabric lying down, but it holds it neatly in place for sewing. So I'm just going to sew along this seam and I'll be back in a moment. So I've now gone and sewn along this last edge. Two things you need to check first is that that corner is neat and your seams are matching, and that the white corner on this triangle is on your seam. You need to turn over because we're going to iron towards that big triangle. Make sure that everything's lying nice and flat here. So that's your cactus made. Now we're going to make the pot. You want to take in your large red daisy triangle, and that's going to go at the bottom here. So you need to flip that up, match your edges, and then pin in place. Might help if you turn it over and then iron from this side so you can make sure that your back seams align nicely. You are working on 2 bias seams again here, so you just want to make sure that you're not pulling and distorting your fabric. Put one in the middle. So I'm going to pop off and sew this seam, and I'll be back again in a moment. So I've gone along this seam here, and we want to be ironing towards the blossom, which is why I've got it up. But first of all, you want to turn over, just double check that your outside yellow bottom points are on your seam line. So I'm just going to set this seam down and iron open. Just take a moment to make sure that everything is still lying nicely flat. So we're going to pop this to the side for a moment. You're going to bring in your 2 white rectangles that you've got left over, have them side by side, and then your 2 daisy triangles you want to put at the ends with the corners pointing towards the middle. Just flip those up right side to right side and pin along this seam. Make sure, take a bit of time to make sure that they're matching nicely. It actually looks quite a complicated block, but when you've put it down step by step, it takes some time. It's a little bit longer to do than the others, but it comes out really nicely if you do take time to make sure that you keep a 6mm seam allowance, and you just take time to match all your seams up nicely and iron as you go through as well. So I've got those 2 pieces pinned now. And pop along and sew on these edges here, and I'll be back in a moment when I'm going to pin them onto our main block. So I've gone and sewn along those 2 seams there, and we're wanting to press towards the white in this case. It's not normal with the red and white, but it makes sure that everything does lie nice and flat. Just press the seam, press it open. Do the same for this one. And we're going to make sure that they go this right way. So we're going to point this one with that pointing up, and you're going to place this one again pointing up towards the cactus. So I'm going to take this first seam here, flip it over. You can only do one of these at a time. I'm going to work from this centre one here when I'm pinning. I'm going to turn over and sew from this edge to make sure that that deep seam will lie flat. Just make sure you got that seam lying nice and flat before you pin it. Again, it's worth time. It's worth you taking a lot of time over this just to make sure that everything does lie nice and flat. Saves you a lot of hassle in the long run, and it does make it look a lot neater. Again, we've got a double fold over seam here, so I'm going to pin at either side. So now I've got all my pins in there. I'm just going to sew along this seam and I'll be back in a moment. So I've gone along our first seam here. I'm just going to iron and set that and then go out towards what you've just put on. We're going to repeat the same on the other side. So you place that on there. I've got a little bit of extra fabric on this side, but it is important to go to the middle seam and fold in. Again, I'm going to turn over and pin it from this side, as you've got a double fold over. If you go from the middle first and pin here, I'm actually going to sew from this end over. So you just need to make sure everything is lying as flat as it can be. Before you put your pins in. Seam there, I'm going to pin through just to make sure it runs the right way. And then I've got this double fold over here. So once I've made sure that it matches back and front, I'm pinning either side. I'll take the pins out last minute and just make sure that everything runs through the machine neatly as I'm going. So I'm going to go across this seam now and I'll see you back here in a moment. So I've gone along this seam here. One thing you need to double check is that your yellow points match on your seam there. They didn't on here, they went over by a couple of millimetres, but everything matches. One thing I did notice is you have to move that one down before you sew it. So when you open it, your lines on your red triangles match. So I'm just going to iron this open. You want to iron towards the block that you've just sewn on again. So you just make sure everything is nice and flat. Now to complete this block, we just need to pop this white triangle on. Turn that way around. Work out my right side. And put that to there. making sure everything matches up really nicely, which it does. I'm actually going to turn over and do it from this side, so again I can make sure that all my seams, especially the one in the middle, lie really nice and flat. We're working on bias edges on your red triangles here and on your white triangle, so just take a moment to make sure that everything is nice and smooth and not being pulled. So I'm just going to pop a pin close to the edge. Now I am going to put one in this middle, but I'm going to change it slightly and put it in the centre of the block. If you do try to put it through here, then it's just going to distort everything out of the way. So I'm just going to go along this final seam here, and I'll see you back in a moment for the final ironing. So now I've gone and sewn that final seam, just made sure, as you can see, that everything's lying flat here. So I'm just going to check that the red triangle, the big one, matches on your seam line, which it does really nicely, and everything's nice and smooth. So you want to iron towards the white fabric, so I'm just setting that, and then open and iron really carefully. And there we go, there is the completed block. Just take a moment and go over all of your seams. There is a lot in this one, as it is a complicated block, and it has taken a lot longer than blocks before. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and the cactus pot block that we've created. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified of our new videos. Further information about crafts at home, the art of quilting and hat-shape artworks can be found on the social media pages that are listed in the description. Don't forget to join us next week for issue 10, where we'll be making the sawtooth star block.